Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the center of the Great Hall on Nexus Prime Space Station. The massive chamber stretched out around him like a metal cathedral. 12 alien species sat in judgment above him on floating platforms that moved slowly, in a wide circle. Each platform held the representatives of worlds he had helped save just months ago during the Void War. The air tasted metallic and cold. Jake could hear his own breathing echo in the silence. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood beside him, her diplomatic uniform crisp and perfect. Behind them sat Dr. Peter Walsh, the scientist whose inventions had turned the tide of war, and Commander Alex Turner, whose battle scars still showed fresh on his weathered face. Chancellor Valthara floated forward on her crystalline platform. The Axiom leader's body shimmered like liquid glass, and her voice rang out with the authority of someone who had never doubted her own righteousness. She gestured toward Jake with one of her 4 graceful arms. "Admiral Morrison," she began. Her words translated instantly into perfect English by the station systems. "You stand accused of leading humanity in acts of excessive violence during the recent conflict. Your species demonstrated a level of brutality that has no place in civilized society." Jake kept his face calm, but his jaw tightened. Behind the Chancellor, holographic images began to play. They showed human ships ramming into void entity vessels. They showed soldiers throwing themselves at impossible odds. They showed the desperate final assault on the Void Mother ship, where 3,000 humans had died to save a galaxy that now called them monsters. "We see here," Valthara continued, "evidence of your people's primitive nature. While the civilized races of the galaxy employed calculated strategies and proper military doctrine, humans resorted to suicide attacks, guerrilla warfare, and what can only be described as savage desperation." The images changed to show alien fleet formations, perfect lines of ships firing in coordinated patterns, elegant maneuvers that looked like deadly dances among the stars. Then came the results, ship after ship falling to the void entity's adaptive defenses. Entire fleets reduced to scrap metal, while their commanders followed protocols that had worked for 1,000 years. Against conventional enemies, Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. Her voice carried clearly through the hall. "Chancellor, with respect, those protocols were failing. The void entities were unlike anything the galaxy had faced before. They learned from every attack, adapted to every weapon. Traditional warfare was getting everyone killed." A new voice spoke from another platform. Admiral Kickstar of the Hegemony, his reptilian features twisted with disgust. "And your solution was to abandon all honor, all dignity. You fought like wild animals." Commander Turner's scarred hands clenched into fists, but Jake placed a warning hand on his shoulder. The Admiral spoke carefully. "We fought to win. We fought to save lives. Every tactic you call savage was designed to end the war as quickly as possible with minimum casualties." Dr. Walsh stood up from his chair. The elderly scientist's voice shook slightly with controlled anger. "The quantum bombs I developed ended the war in 3 months instead of 3 years. My calculations show that traditional methods would have cost 50 million more lives across 12 worlds. 50 million people who are alive today because humans were willing to do what others called impossible." Chancellor Valthara's form rippled with what might have been amusement. "Dr. Walsh, your inventions are indeed impressive. However, the methods by which they were deployed demonstrate humanity's inherent instability. You created weapons that other species would never dare to use." The holographic display showed the final battle again. Jake watched himself on the screen, ordering the last desperate gambit that had won the war. Human ships, outnumbered 50 to 1, diving directly into the heart of the Void Mother. No shields, no backup, just human pilots flying straight at certain death because someone had to get close enough to deploy Walsh's quantum bomb. One by one, the alien representatives cast their votes. The Zephyrians voted for banishment, claiming humans were too unpredictable to trust. The Kethani voted for exile, saying human emotions made them dangerous allies. The Titanus Collective agreed, stating that humans lacked proper respect for military hierarchy. Only one voice spoke against the tide. Ambassador Zaralin of the Kethani, the youngest member of the council, rose from her platform. Her violet skin flushed darker with obvious distress. "Honored colleagues," she said, her musical voice carrying a note of desperation. "We debate the character of a species that saved us all. Yes, their methods were unconventional. Yes, they took risks that seemed impossible, but they succeeded where we failed. They won a war that we were losing." Chancellor Velfara's response came swift and cold. "Young Zaralin, your sympathy is noted, but misguided. Humanity's victory does not excuse their methods. A civilized galaxy cannot tolerate such primitiveness, regardless of temporary benefits." The vote was 11-1. Banishment. Jake felt the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. Around him, his officers stood straighter, as if preparing for battle. But there would be no battle here. The council had spoken. Chancellor Velfara announced the terms with ceremonial formality. "By the authority of the Galactic Preservation Council, humanity is hereby expelled from galactic civilization. You have 30 standard cycles to evacuate all human colonies and installations outside your home system. After this period, a quantum barrier will be erected around Earth and its territorial space. No human vessel will be permitted to cross this barrier. No communication will be allowed between humanity and the civilized galaxy." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward one last time. "Chancellor, we ask you to reconsider. Humanity has much to offer the galaxy. Our innovations, our determination, our willingness to sacrifice for others." "Your willingness to sacrifice others, you mean?" interrupted Admiral Kickstar. "We have seen enough human sacrifice to last several lifetimes." Jake finally spoke, his voice carrying across the vast chamber with quiet authority. "You're making a mistake. A terrible mistake that you'll regret sooner than you think." The Admiral looked up at each alien representative in turn. "You call us primitive because we're willing to die for what's right. You call us savage because we don't give up when the odds are impossible. You call us unstable because we think outside your comfortable rules." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But mark my words, when the next crisis comes, and it will come, you'll wish you had humans standing beside you instead of locked away behind your barrier." Chancellor Velthara's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been pity. "Admiral Morrison, your threats do not concern us. The galaxy will be safer without humanity's chaotic influence." As they left the chamber, Dr. Walsh walked beside Captain Rodriguez. His voice was quiet, but carried clearly in the corridor. "They think they're getting rid of a problem, Lessa, but they're throwing away their greatest asset. When something comes that their perfect protocols can't handle, they'll remember what they lost today." Jake looked back once at the Great Hall, where the council continued their session. Ambassador Zaralin caught his eye and nodded slightly, gesture of respect from the only alien who had spoken for humanity. The human delegation walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime toward their shuttle. Behind them, the representatives of 12 species celebrated their victory over human barbarism. They spoke of a new golden age of peace and prosperity, free from the chaos that humanity brought to everything they touched. None of them noticed the long-range sensors detecting movement at the galaxy's edge, something vast and hungry, drawn by the recent wars, approaching with patient inevitability toward a galaxy that had just banished its most effective defenders. 50 years had passed since the great ships of humanity crossed the quantum barrier for the last time. Earth hung in space like a blue jewel, surrounded by the shimmer of energy that cut it off from the galaxy beyond. But humanity had not withered. In their golden cage, they had grown stronger. Commander Beth Collins stood on the bridge of the newest human starship, watching her crew run final tests on systems that would amaze the aliens who had banished them. Her father had been a Void War veteran, one of the pilots who never came back from that final desperate assault. She had grown up hearing stories of the galaxy beyond the barrier, and now she commanded vessels that surpassed anything those aliens had ever built. The ship around her hummed with quiet power. Human engineers had been forced to innovate without alien technology to copy or trade for. Every solution had come from human minds, human hands, human determination to build something better than what they had lost. The results were sleek vessels that moved like dancers through space, powered by engines that drew energy from quantum foam itself. Marcus Stone wiped sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the construction project on New Terra colony. The gas giant's upper atmosphere now held a city that floated on repulsor fields of human design. Below them, mining platforms extracted rare elements from the planet's core, using techniques that bent physics in ways the old galaxy's scientists said were impossible. The colony had been one of humanity's first attempts at atmospheric engineering. The Council had expected humans to struggle without alien guidance, to fail at the complex calculations needed to build cities in gas giant atmospheres. Instead, human engineers had solved problems in months that had stumped galactic scientists. For centuries, Marcus walked through streets lined with gardens that grew in artificial gravity wells. Children ran past him, born free from the prejudice that had defined their parents' generation. These young humans had never known alien disapproval, never felt the sting of being called primitive or savage. They were growing up with confidence that humanity could accomplish anything. Dr. Patricia Brooks stood in Lunar Research Station, watching data scroll across her screens with growing excitement. Her team had cracked the mathematics of quantum manipulation in ways that made her laugh with pure joy. The equations were elegant, beautiful, and completely beyond what the Galactic Council thought possible for primitive human minds. Around her, other scientists worked on projects that pushed the boundaries of known science. Artificial intelligence that could think faster than biological brains. Terraforming techniques that could turn dead rocks into garden worlds in decades instead of centuries. Energy systems that could power entire civilizations without depleting a single natural resource. The barrier that imprisoned them had become their greatest teacher. Unable to rely on alien knowledge, humans had been forced to understand the universe on their own terms. The results were technologies that leaped past galactic standards by generations. President Nathan Clark walked through the halls of the rebuilt United Nations building, reviewing reports from across human space. 12 colony worlds now thrived. Behind the barrier, the population had grown by 2 billion since the banishment, and every new generation seemed more capable than the last. He paused at a window overlooking Earth's restored cities. The old world had bloomed during its isolation. Pollution was gone, replaced by clean fusion power and atmospheric processors. Oceans teemed with life again. Forests covered continents that had been barren when the barrier first rose. The president's advisors brought him intelligence reports gathered from quantum signals that leaked through the barrier. The galaxy beyond enjoyed what they called the Great Peace. Trade flourished between the 12 alien species. Conflicts were resolved through careful diplomatic protocols. The Council believed they had created perfect civilization. Nathan smiled grimly as he read about their success. Peace was good, but peace could make people soft. The galaxy had forgotten how to face real danger, how to fight when fighting was the only option. They had grown comfortable with their elegant solutions and traditional methods. Ambassador Zaralyn had become an elder stateswoman in the 50 years since humanity's banishment. She often spoke to the Council about the wisdom of diverse thinking. But her words fell on deaf ears. The other species saw their peaceful prosperity as proof that banishing humanity had been the right choice. She alone among the aliens remembered what humans could accomplish when pushed to their limits. She alone wondered what innovations they might be developing behind their barrier. But even she could not have imagined the truth. Dr. Brooks looked up from her instruments as alarms began to sound throughout Luna Station. Her quantum sensors were detecting massive energy signatures at the galaxy's edge, signatures unlike anything in their databases. Something huge was moving through deep space, approaching from the direction of the galactic rim where no known civilizations existed. She tried to send a warning transmission to the galactic authorities, but the barrier blocked all outgoing communications. The same quantum field that kept humanity isolated now prevented them from warning the galaxy of approaching danger. The energy signatures were growing stronger each day. Whatever was coming moved faster than any known vessel, leading distortions in space-time that suggested technology far beyond anything humans or aliens had developed. Brooks felt a chill of recognition as she studied the data. These patterns reminded her of something from the old war files. The void entities had been machines, artificial intelligences that consumed matter to fuel their expansion. But the energy signatures she was detecting now suggested something different, something alive, something that ate entire star systems not for fuel, but for food. President Clark received Dr. Brooks' report with growing alarm. If the galaxy faced a new threat, they would respond with their traditional methods, coordinated fleets following established military doctrine. The same methods that had failed so completely during the Void War until humans showed them a different way. He called an emergency session of the human leadership. Veterans of the Void War sat beside young commanders who had never seen combat. Scientists who had spent 50 years perfecting impossible technologies shared tables with engineers who had built wonders in the depths of space. The debate was intense but brief. Some argued that humanity owed the galaxy nothing after 50 years of exile. Others pointed out that the barrier protected them from whatever was coming. But the president's decision reflected the core of human nature. They would prepare to help, regardless of past grievances. Across human space, shipyards increased production. Military bases activated reserve fleets. Scientists worked around the clock to adapt their peaceful innovations for warfare. If the galaxy needed saving again, humanity would be ready. But first, they had to find a way through the barrier that the Council had built to keep them out. The same quantum field that had protected the galaxy from human savagery now stood between humanity and the civilizations they had once died to defend. Dr. Brooks stared at her instruments as the unknown signals grew stronger. Whatever was coming had noticed the galaxy's energy signatures and was adjusting course toward the most populated systems. Soon, the aliens beyond the barrier would face the same choice that had confronted them during the Void War: adapt or die. This time, they would face it alone. The first scout ships died without sending a single message back to their fleets. One moment they were investigating unusual energy readings at the galaxy's edge. The next moment, they simply ceased to exist. No explosions, no distress calls. They were there, then they were gone, as if space itself had swallowed them whole. Chancellor Velthara, now ancient and moving slowly, despite her crystalline body's natural grace, reviewed the reports with growing unease. 3 scout ships from different species had vanished in the same sector over the past week. The quantum sensors showed nothing unusual, but something was wrong. Space did not simply erase vessels without leaving traces. Admiral Kixtar paced the command deck of his flagship, studying tactical displays that made no sense. His reptilian features twisted with frustration as he tried to understand what his scouts had encountered. The hegemony had lost 2 ships to whatever lurked at the galactic rim. and the lack of information gnawed at his strategic mind. The first real contact came when Captain Roy Hendricks, flying a modified cargo hauler near the quantum barrier, detected massive movement on his long-range sensors. Roy made his living smuggling goods between the outer colonies, always staying just inside legal boundaries. His ship carried sensor equipment that was technically illegal, but incredibly sensitive. What he saw made his blood freeze. Ships, if they could be called ships, emerged from the darkness between stars. They moved like living things, pulsing, with organic energy that his sensors could barely interpret. The smallest of them dwarfed a battleship. The largest were the size of moons. Roy tried to transmit a warning to the galactic authorities, but his message was intercepted by something that should not have been possible. One of the alien vessels changed course toward him with impossible speed. He had seconds to appreciate the terrible beauty of the creature bearing down on him, a mass of crystalline flesh and glowing organs that looked like a jellyfish made of living starlight. His cargo hauler was fast, but the alien thing was faster. Tendrils of energy reached out from its body, testing his shields with curious hunger. Roy poured all power to his engines and fled toward the quantum barrier, hoping that the energy field might confuse his pursuer. The creature followed him for several light minutes before losing interest and turning back toward the galaxy's populated systems. Roy found himself alone in space, shaking with terror and staring at the barrier that had once seemed like humanity's prison, but now looked like salvation. The first major engagement took place at Kepler Station, a trade hub where 3 different species maintained commercial facilities. The station's defensive fleet consisted of 40 vessels following traditional galactic military doctrine heavy battleships arranged in precise formations, supported by lighter cruisers in standard tactical positions. Fleet Admiral Zexenol of the Zephyrian Navy watched his sensors with professional confidence as the unknown contacts approached. His fleet had faced pirates, raiders, and occasional territorial disputes for 30 years. Whatever these new aliens wanted, they would learn to respect galactic authority. The Devourers emerged from hyperspace in a formation that defied every rule of military engagement. They spread out like living spores, each vessel moving independently, but somehow coordinated with the others. When the galactic fleet opened fire, the aliens did something impossible. They adapted. The first wave of energy weapons struck Devourer vessels and seemed to cause significant damage. Crystalline hulls cracked, organic systems flickered, and several alien ships fell behind their formation. Admiral Zexenol allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before ordering a second volley. The second wave of fire did nothing. The Devourer ships had changed, their crystalline hulls now reflecting the energy beams harmlessly back into space. When the galactic fleet switched to kinetic weapons, the aliens adapted again, their flesh becoming dense and resilient. Explosive. Missiles were absorbed and somehow digested, their energy feeding the creatures that should have been destroyed. Admiral Zexenol watched in horror as his perfect battle formation was methodically dismantled. Every weapon his fleet fired taught the Devourers how to defend against it. Every tactic he employed was countered by alien responses that grew more sophisticated with each exchange. The battle ended when the largest Devourer vessel simply engulfed 3 of his battleships. The alien creature expanded like a massive mouth, its crystalline flesh stretching to surround the galactic vessels. When it contracted again, the ships were gone, not destroyed, but consumed, their energy and matter absorbed into the aliens. Growing mass. Dr. Patricia Brooks, monitoring galactic communications from Luna Station, detected the energy signatures of the battle and felt her worst fears confirmed. The patterns matched her theoretical models for adaptive organic technology, creatures that evolved in real time to counter any threat. It was every military strategist's nightmare made real. She tried again to penetrate the quantum barrier with a warning signal, but the field held firm. Humanity could only watch as the galaxy beyond faced an enemy that conventional warfare could not defeat. Velfara convened an emergency session of the Galactic Council as reports poured in. From the outer systems, 7 trade stations had gone silent. 12 scout fleets had vanished. The few survivors described impossible creatures that learned from every battle and grew stronger with each victory. The Council's response followed predictable patterns. They authorized the formation of the Grand Galactic Fleet under Admiral Kickstar's command. Traditional battle tactics were refined and improved. Weapons were standardized across all species to ensure coordinated fire patterns. Everything was done according to the military doctrines that had maintained galactic peace for 50 years. Ambassador Zarelin watched the preparations with growing dread. She remembered another crisis 50 years ago when traditional methods had failed completely until humans showed them a different way. But the humans were gone now, sealed behind the barrier that was supposed to protect the galaxy from their chaotic influence. The Grand Fleet launched with ceremony and confidence. 200 ships from 12 species, arranged in perfect formation, following battle plans that had been tested and refined over centuries. They moved toward the galactic rim like a spear thrust at the heart of the unknown enemy. They met the Devourers in the Centauri Nebula, where ancient stars provided a dramatic backdrop for what should have been humanity's final vindication. The battle was visible across several star systems, as energy weapons lit up the nebula like a fireworks display. For 6 hours, the Grand Fleet followed doctrine perfectly. They maintained formation, concentrated fire on priority targets, and executed tactical maneuvers with precision that would have impressed military academies across the galaxy. And for 6 hours, they were systematically destroyed by enemies that learned from every mistake. Captain Roy Hendricks still lurking near. The quantum barrier watched the battle's energy signatures fade into nothing. The Grand Fleet was gone. The Devourers continued their advance toward the galaxy's core, now stronger than ever. Having absorbed the knowledge and energy of the greatest military force the civilized species could assemble behind the barrier. Humanity watched and waited, knowing that the galaxy's last hope lay with the very people it had banished for being too primitive to understand proper warfare. Ambassador Zarelin stood before the emergency session of what remained of the Galactic Council. Half the member worlds had gone silent over the past month. The Axiom homeworld was gone, consumed by creatures that turned entire planets into feeding grounds. Chancellor Velfara herself was dead, her crystalline form shattered when the capital fleet made its final stand in the Vega system. Only 6 species remained in contact with each other, their representatives gathering in a makeshift command center on the heavily defended fortress world of Titan Prime. The mood was desperate. Every conventional strategy had failed. Every weapon they possessed had been adapted to and countered by the Devourers. Zarelin looked at her fellow survivors with eyes that had seen too much death. Admiral Kickstar, his proud reptilian bearing broken by endless defeats. Commander Yethai of the Cathani, whose people's biological weapons had been turned against them by creatures that could absorb and replicate any organic attack. Fleet Captain Nexal of the Titanus Collective, whose suicide tactics had only fed the enemy's growing strength. "We have one option left," Zarelin said, her musical voice carrying across the chamber with quiet authority. "We must contact humanity." The response was immediate and predictable. Admiral Kickstar's scarred fists slammed against the table. "Never. We will not beg aid from those primitives. There must be another way." Commander Yethai's violet skin flushed darker with stress. "The humans were banished for good reason. Their methods are barbaric, unpredictable. How do we know they will not simply make our situation worse?" Zarelin stood firm against their protests. "Because their methods work. 50 years ago, when conventional warfare failed against the void entities, human tactics saved us all. Now we face something even worse, and we refuse to learn from the past. Fleet Captain Nexal spoke quietly from his position near the strategic displays. Even if we wanted to contact them, the quantum barrier prevents all communication. The same field we erected to contain their influence now seals us away from their aid. Dr. Patricia Brooks detected the quantum fluctuations from her position. At Luna Station, something was happening to the barrier. Brief moments of instability that suggested someone was trying to modify the field from the other side. She immediately contacted the human leadership with her findings. President Nathan Clark, now in his 70s but still sharp, called an emergency meeting of Humanity's Council. The reports from beyond the barrier painted a grim picture. The galaxy was dying, consumed by creatures that human scientists had theorized about but hoped never to encounter. Commander Beth Collins argued for immediate action. Sir, we have the technology to break through the barrier. Our quantum resonance generators could create temporary openings large enough for communication, maybe even for ships. Admiral Jake Morrison, ancient but still commanding respect at 93 years old, supported her position. The galaxy cast us out, but that does not mean we should let it burn. If we can help, we must. Dr. Peter Walsh's son, Dr. Kevin Walsh, presented the technical challenges. Father's old files contain theoretical frameworks for countering adaptive organisms. The quantum virus concept could work, but we would need detailed information about the enemy's structure and weaknesses. The debate was intense but brief. President Clark made the decision that would define humanity's character for generations. They would help regardless of past grievances or present dangers. Dr. Brooks worked around the clock to modify her quantum resonance transmitter. The barrier was incredibly complex, designed by the galaxy's best scientists to be impenetrable. But it had one weakness: it was built using traditional thinking, following established patterns that human minds could find ways around. The first breakthrough came when she realized the barrier was not actually solid. It was a quantum field. That shifted frequency every few microseconds to prevent any signal from finding a stable transmission window. But human computers, enhanced by 50 years of isolation and innovation, could predict those frequency shifts and adjust faster than the barrier could adapt. Her first message got through for exactly 0.3 seconds, barely enough time to transmit. A simple code that meant, "We are here." But it was enough. On the other side of the barrier, desperate alien scientists detected the signal and began working to establish contact. Ambassador Zarlin led the technical team trying to communicate with humanity. The irony was bitter. She had to convince the same species that had banished humans to now beg for their return. But survival made strange allies of former enemies. The breakthrough came when human and alien scientists worked together across the barrier. Using quantum entanglement principles that neither side fully understood, they created a communication link that lasted for nearly 10 minutes. Enough time for a desperate conversation that changed everything. Zaralen's voice came through the quantum static with desperate clarity. "Admiral Morrison, if you can hear this, the galaxy is dying. We were wrong to banish you. We need your help." Jake Morrison's response was immediate. "We know about the Devourers. We have been monitoring the situation. What do you need from us?" The conversation that followed laid out the galaxy's desperate situation. Entire worlds consumed, fleets destroyed, traditional methods not just failing, but actually making the enemy stronger. The Devourers were learning from every battle, evolving beyond the ability of conventional forces to counter. Morrison's analysis was swift and brutal. You are fighting them the wrong way. The more predictable your attacks, the faster they adapt. You need chaos, not order. You need humans. The technical challenges of breaching the barrier seemed impossible until Dr. Brooks made her second breakthrough. The barrier was powered by quantum generators, on both sides alien technology, on the outside, but the control systems had been built using principles that human scientists could understand and manipulate, working together across the dimensional divide. Human and alien technicians began the delicate process of creating a stable opening. It would take days of careful work, and there was no guarantee it would succeed. But for the first time in 50 years, humanity and the galaxy were working toward the same goal. President Clark began mobilizing the human fleet. Ships that had been built in secret, using technologies the aliens could never have imagined, prepared for their first deployment beyond the barrier. Crews that had trained for decades in theoretical combat prepared to face an enemy that conventional wisdom said could not be defeated. The quantum barrier flickered as the first human ships approached the opening that alien and human scientists had worked together to create. Admiral Morrison, despite his age, would personally lead the fleet that emerged. Behind him came vessels that would shock the galaxy, sleek, deadly, and built according to principles that made mockery of traditional military thinking. As the barrier parted like a curtain of light, humanity prepared to show the galaxy once again that sometimes the most primitive solution was also the most effective. The Devourers had learned to counter every conventional tactic, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to be conventional. The galaxy's last hope flew through the opening in the barrier, carrying with them 50 years of innovation, determination, and the uniquely human conviction that impossible odds were just another challenge to overcome. The human fleet that emerged from the quantum barrier bore no resemblance to the ships that had been banished 50 years earlier. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defiant Dawn, watching alien faces on his communication. Screens react with shock to vessels that seem to bend the laws of physics. Captain Tony Garcia led the first squadron of human ships into battle against a devourer-feeding cluster near the Proxima system. His vessel, the Wildfire, moved through space like a living thing, its adaptive hull shifting and changing as the ship's AI systems predicted enemy responses and countered them before they could be deployed. The Devourers had grown strong, feeding on alien fleets. The largest creatures were now the size of small moons, their crystalline bodies pulsing with absorbed energy from dozens of conquered worlds. They moved with the confidence of apex predators that had learned to counter every possible threat, but they had never faced humans. Garcia's attack began with a suicide run straight at the largest devourer, exactly the kind of primitive tactic that had gotten humanity banished. But as the creature opened its massive feeding maw to consume his ship, Garcia's vessel split apart into a dozen smaller components that scattered in impossible directions. Each component was a fully functional ship, controlled by AI systems that thought faster than biological minds. They struck the devourer from angles that should not have existed, using weapons that fired backwards through folded space, carrying warheads that detonated inside the creature's body before it could adapt to counter them. The devourer died in seconds, its crystalline flesh shattering as quantum explosives tore it apart from within. The other creatures in the cluster turned toward this new threat, ready to learn and adapt as they had done for months against alien forces. But humans fought differently. Instead of coordinated attacks that could be predicted and countered, each human ship acted independently. Some fired conventional weapons, others used exotic energy beams. Still others simply rammed into devourer vessels at impossible speeds. There was no pattern to learn from, no central strategy to decode and counter. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez, now commanding the human Second Fleet, coordinated with alien survivors who struggled to understand human tactics. When Zephyr and Admiral Zendal questioned the logic of sending single ships against capital-class devourers, Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Logic is what got you into this mess," she told him over the communication link. "These creatures are perfect adaptation machines. They learn from logical attacks, counter systematic strategies, and grow stronger from predictable enemies. So we give them chaos instead. Dr. Patricia Brooks, working from her laboratory ship in the rear of the human formation, had spent 50 years developing the theoretical framework for victory. The Devourer's greatest strength, their ability to rapidly adapt to any threat, was also their critical weakness. She had discovered that each adaptation created quantum instabilities in the creature's crystalline matrix. The more rapidly they evolved, the more unstable their fundamental structure became. If they could be forced to adapt too quickly, to counter too many different threats simultaneously, their own biology would collapse. The key insight came from Dr. Kevin Walsh, Peter Walsh's son, who had inherited his father's genius for impossible solutions. He realized that the Devourer's hive mind, while incredibly powerful for coordination and learning, could not truly understand individual creativity and self-sacrifice concepts that defined human nature. Working with his mother's quantum virus research, Kevin developed a weapon that introduced chaos patterns directly into the Devourer communication network. These patterns were based on recorded human decision-making processes, the kind of illogical, emotional, stupidly brave choices that had gotten humanity banished in the first place, that the virus spread through the Devourer hive mind like a digital plague, but instead of destroying their communication, it forced them to experience something they had never encountered: doubt. For creatures that had operated with perfect coordination and absolute certainty, the introduction of human-style uncertainty was devastating. Suddenly, Devourer formations began making random mistakes. Creatures that should have adapted to human weapons instead tried to counter threats that did not exist. Perfect biological machines began second-guessing their own instincts, paralyzed by possibilities they could not compute. The final battle took place at the galactic core, where the Devourer Queen Mind had established her primary nest among the Guanghu, ancient stars. She was vast beyond comprehension, a creature that had absorbed the energy of entire civilizations and grown into something that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Admiral Morrison, despite being 93 years old, insisted on leading the assault personally. His ship carried the final version of the quantum virus, along with enough conventional explosives to crack a small moon. The mission was simple in the way that all the best human plans were simple, yet close enough to deploy the weapon, regardless of the cost. The Queen Mind's defenses should have been impenetrable. Millions of smaller Devourers swarmed around her like antibodies protecting a vast organism. Energy weapons that could destroy battleships created barriers of deadly light around her crystalline bulk. But humans had never let impossible odds stop them before. Commander Alex Turner, now an elderly veteran carrying the scars of 2 wars, volunteered to lead the final assault. His ship, loaded with quantum explosives and crewed by volunteers who knew they would not return, approached the Queen Mind through a storm of defensive fire. The attack succeeded not because of superior technology or brilliant strategy, but because it was fundamentally insane. Turner's ship flew directly into the Queen Mind's feeding mouth, ignoring every defensive system, every energy barrier, every logical reason why the plan should fail. The creature tried to adapt, to counter this suicidal approach, but there was nothing to counter except pure human stubbornness. The explosion that followed lit up half the galactic core. The Queen Mind's death scream echoed across quantum dimensions as her vast body collapsed into itself, taking with it the coordination that had made the Devourer swarm so dangerous. Without her guidance, the remaining creatures became confused. Directionless, easy prey for the combined human and alien fleets. In the aftermath, billions were dead, and dozens of worlds were gone, but organic life had survived. The galaxy lay in ruins, but it was alive. Chancellor Velfara was gone, but Ambassador Zarelin had become the de facto leader of what remained of galactic civilization. She found President Clark on the observation deck of his command ship, watching Earth's sun rise over the rebuilt galactic capital on Titan Prime. Around them, human and alien workers labored together to repair the damage that months of war had inflicted on their civilizations. "We owe you an apology," Zaralin said simply. 50 years ago, we judged you for the very qualities that saved us all." President Clark nodded slowly. "We are not the same species we were when you banished us. 50 years of isolation taught used to be better than we were, but we never forgot what it meant to fight for something bigger than ourselves." The new Galactic Covenant was signed on the anniversary of the first Devourer attack. This time, humanity was not a junior member seeking acceptance. They were full partners, respected for exactly the traits that had once gotten them exiled. The document included a crucial clause that Zaralin had insisted upon. Never again shall any species be judged for the very qualities that make them unique. Admiral Morrison, ancient but still sharp, stood with the other signatories as the ceremony concluded. When reporters asked if he thought humanity would face prejudice again, he smiled with the confidence of someone who had lived through 2 impossible wars. "Let them try," he said quietly. "They know better now." Dr. Patricia Brooks stood with her colleagues watching the sunrise over the rebuilt capital. Her quantum research had made the victory possible, but she knew that technology alone had not won the war. It was the uniquely human combination of brilliance and madness, logic and intuition, sacrifice and stubbornness that had saved the galaxy. When younger scientists asked her about the future, about what challenges might come next, she always gave the same answer: "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. All of us." That's what we learned from the Devourers. Diversity makes us stronger, not weaker. The final scene showed human ships patrolling the galactic rim, not as conquerors, but as guardians. Their crews were mixed, now humans and aliens working side by side, sharing knowledge and perspectives that neither could achieve alone. They watched the darkness between stars, ready to face whatever threats might emerge from the vast unknown, because that was what humans did. They protected those who could not protect themselves, even when those people had once called them monsters. They stood watch over a galaxy that had learned, perhaps too late, that the qualities they feared in humanity were exactly the qualities that made civilization worth defending. The quantum barrier was gone, dismantled by the same cooperation that had defeated the Devourers. In its place stood something better: a galaxy, united not by uniformity, but by the recognition that their differences were their greatest strength. And at the heart of it all were the humans, the species that had been banished for being too primitive to understand proper civilization,